two things to note. I'm going to put it on Canvas today to update the schedule again. Exam is next Tuesday. I really hate giving exams on Tuesdays because I know you guys don't want to study over the weekend. And it's like 5 days from Thursday, so like it's not really fresh in your mind. But I don't know if this semester if we're like missing a week or something, but it's going way quicker than normal. And I still want to be able to fit in some of the fun stuff at the end. We're talking about like gypsies and like that kind of stuff. And then the real world assignment is due this Thursday. It's like on Canvas, so you can like submit it there. It's not due till midnight on Thursday, so you have like after class to still do it. Remember, it's not like a term paper, it's just literally just a homework assignment. I want you to see that you're able to apply something that we're learning in class to something you read like outside of class. So I know if I'm covering things thoroughly enough, if you guys are getting it. Good thing is getting everything done by, like all the assignments done by next Tuesday, is that then when like at the very end of the semester when all the other classes are like piling on those last minute assignments, you don't have anything for this class. So this week might be a little annoying, but it sets you up for like at least some free time or some ability to spread out your work later. Like last time, if you have any questions about your article, like, hey, is this article good enough? Is this appropriate? There's something I can pull from this. You can email it to me. I'll be more than happy to take a look at it and let you know if that's something you can do. Any questions about either the exam or the real world assignment before I get started? And I'll be posting the study guide to Canvas today as well for the next exam, so you can start going over that. And we'll hit any questions you have with it at the end of next class. So again, you at least have some sort of like preparation or some chance to get some questions answered. So today we're looking at perfectly competitive markets. So we're beginning to look at the 4 types of market structures. So we have perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. Going from left to right, from perfect competition to monopoly, we get fewer and fewer firms and less competition. So perfectly competitive markets is held up by economists as the ideal market where there is the most competition. It's not the most practical, not representative of the real world, but there are some markets where these characteristics hold. So it's worthwhile to study. The characteristics of this market, there's many buyers and sellers. All the firms are selling identical products. So not just like very similar, but no matter who you go to buy that product, it's going to be exactly the same. So there's no reason to care about who you're buying from. Again, different than most markets. But that's what happens in perfectly competitive markets. There's also no barriers for new firms to enter the market. Obviously, there's startup costs involved, whether you're starting a new business or switching from one industry to another, or making one product to another. But there's no big regulations in your way. The costs of switching aren't absurd, that it's not worth it for firms to switch or for entrepreneurs to start a new business. It's generally fairly easy to begin competing in this new market. So because of that, if there's a good opportunity for profit in this industry, you'll have firms entering that industry. Now the first 2 conditions, the many buyers and sellers and all the products are identical, imply that these firms are what we call price takers. Because there's a lot of sellers on the market and there's no difference between the product you get between those different firms, firms don't have an ability to set the price. They have to accept whatever the market gives them. If they try to raise the price, and we'll show this graphically later, they try to raise the price above the market price, no one is going to buy from them. If they try to lower the price below the market price, they're going to make less money. There's absolutely no reason for them to do that because they can sell as many units as they want at that market price. So basically, whatever the market price is going to be, whatever is determined by the interaction of all the buyers and all the sellers, each individual seller is going to sell at that price. Now these markets are relatively rare. We'll look at agricultural markets as an example, because that's one place where this really does seem to hold. So if you're buying wheat from a farmer, it doesn't really matter what farmer you go to, all the wheat's going to be the same. So a perfectly competitive firm has a perfectly horizontal demand curve. So the price elasticity of demand in this market is perfectly elastic. So if there's any change in price, consumers are going to be infinitely responsive. So right here at $7, let's say in this example for wheat, equilibrium price is $7. Whether the firm produces 6,000 units or 15,000 units, I guess bushels in this case, no matter how many bushels of wheat they produce, they're going to sell those at $7. Now, if they try to raise their price above here, again, no one's going to buy from them because they can turn to some other farmer and buy as much wheat as they want from them at the market price of $7. And like I said, because they can sell as many units as they want at that market price, there's no reason for them to lower their prices. When we think of the market demand curves we talked about in the past, where the demand curve slopes downward, in that case, firms would have to lower their prices to get more people to buy whatever product they're selling. In this case, because the demand curve is horizontal, they don't need to lower their price. They can just produce more, and people will be willing to buy. And the reason being, in this market, there are so many producers that these 6,000 bushels of wheat or 15,000 bushels of wheat are very small compared to what everyone else is selling, compared to the total market. Okay, so thinking to the three characteristics that we have. That there's many buyers and sellers, that the products are identical, and that there's no barrier to entrance. Do you think restaurants, in general restaurants, meet the definition of a perfectly competitive market? Do all three of those conditions hold? So are there many buyers and sellers in the market for restaurants? Yeah, there's a lot of restaurants out there and a ton of people that want to go to restaurants. How about number two? Are the products identical? I see people shaking their head no. No, there's a ton of different types of restaurants out there. You can get anything from a pizza shop here to like an Ethiopian restaurant. Very different types of food. You can go to a cheap buffet, like, I don't know, Golden Corral, or you can go to like a 5-star, like Michelin rated restaurant. A lot of differentiation between the different restaurants you can go to. So they're not all identical. And are there barriers to entry into the restaurant market? See people saying, shaking their head no again. Yeah, there's nothing special preventing people from opening a restaurant and starting. How about the electric scooter industry? What do you guys think of that? Like Bird, Lime, like those types of things in big cities. So are there many buyers and sellers in the market? I see some yeses and some nos. Are there a lot of, let's say not nationally, but within each like big city that has these? Are there a lot of different scooter companies? Shaking your head, yes. What example are you thinking of? I think last time I looked in DC, there was like 4 companies or 5 companies. And this was, well, I don't know, almost like 2 years ago now. I mean, it was before COVID. First time I used them was down in Tallahassee, and they just had one company there. But in some of these bigger cities, we're starting to see it look more like a perfectly competitive market because we're seeing a lot more buyers and sellers. But in other places, like you were shaking your head, no, there's not a lot of.
In Chicago, there's one company that does it all.
So in other places, there's not a lot of buyers and sellers. Products are identical, the second one. Are all those electric scooters identical? Or identical enough? Yeah, I think they're, unless someone has more experience, they can say, no, like, limes suck, birds are way better. Or something like that. I don't know anyone who has strong opinions about these. How about barriers to entrance for new competitors? You guys think it's expensive and like prohibitively expensive and very difficult to get into this business?
I feel like it wouldn't be easy, because especially when you're working with the government, you gotta have certain regulations put together for it.
So most cities have some kind of regulations. I remember when they first came out, there was like no regulations on them, and people were just leaving them in bushes and stuff and piling them on the streets. So now some cities are saying you can only have them here.
Yeah.
Maybe they're making them get permits or something before they start. If these regulations, they could be very simple, like restaurants are regulations to get into, but they're pretty simple and pretty cheap to deal with. If they end up being pretty expensive for these cities, then we wouldn't have free entry and exit into this market. So it would not qualify as perfect competition. All right. And the last one, gasoline sales at gas stations. Do you think this is perfectly competitive? I got some yeses already. So yeah, so looking at number one, many buyers and sellers. There's a ton of gas stations out there, a ton of people that buy gas. Products are identical. I mean, gasoline is gasoline. I know some people who say you have to have the same like brand gasoline in your car. You can't like switch them because it's better for your engines. You're shaking your head yes. But
I do that, yeah.
I don't care. Maybe I should, but so maybe you don't consider it perfectly competitive.
I have to buy like a certain type of gas in the car. Like I can't go, like I always buy like mid-grade.
Okay.
This would be better for my engine because it's recommended or whatever.
But there's still a lot of places that sell that mid-grade.
Yeah, it's still a lot of places. I don't go like certain, I go by like pipe, I don't go by like certain companies.
Okay.
Like, I know like Shell is really bad for your engine because it's all watered down. So like there's certain companies, like if you look into it, they're like, they don't have as much gasoline in it, so it messes up your engine. And then especially in the winter, it freezes a lot easier. I have to look into stuff like that.
So most people may consider products identical, but they might not be identical. And there's really no barriers to entry for gasoline sales. To open up like your own small service shop. If you wanted to, be a giant chain and compete with Sheetz, might be pretty expensive. But if you just want like one or two small places in Altoona, not a lot of barriers for you. And later on, we'll talk about how gasoline, how service stations, people that sell gasoline, are able to pull themselves out of perfect competition, how they can differentiate their product and have some sort of market power. But that'll come in the monopolistic competition section. Airlines, very expensive to get in, to start your own airline. You have to purchase all those airplanes. It's gonna be extremely expensive. You need a lot of money. So there's gonna be barriers to entry. And there's not a lot of airlines that are operating. So, like any market, the price and the quantity being sold overall is going to be determined by interaction of buyers and sellers. So we'll look at the supply curve. Supply of wheat would be market for wheat. On this left side is going to be upward sloping, like we've seen before. And the demand curve for wheat is going to be downward sloping. So overall, when wheat becomes more expensive, consumers are going to buy less of it. They're going to try to, they'll buy less wheat or less products made from wheat, substitute for some other things, or maybe they'll forego wheat entirely. When it becomes cheaper, people will buy more of it. Now this is overall in the market. On the right, we see the demand curve, and just the demand curve, for an individual farmer selling wheat. Equilibrium price here in the market is $7. That's where supply and demand cross, where the two curves cross each other. Trace that across here, and then we're going to have a horizontal demand curve right Farmer Parker, for example, can sell any quantity of wheat they want if they sell at $7. So whatever maximizes their own profit, they can choose to sell at that market price. They can't sell above, and they're not going to sell below. It's not worth it for them. Now something that you really can't see from these slides because of how small it's written. In the market for wheat, we have 2.25 billion bushels of wheat per year. Farmer Parker is only making 15,000 bushels of wheat per year. So Farmer Parker is a very small part of this market. Because of that, that's one of the reasons why they're a price taker. Their decision at how to price the wheat or how much wheat to sell isn't going to affect the overall market very much. If they say they decide to produce, instead of 15,000, only 5,000 bushels of wheat per year. So instead of producing over here at this quantity, they're like down here. If there were a couple firms in this market, that would shift the supply curve to the left. And we'd see a reduction in the quantity being supplied, we'd end up with higher prices. But because there's such a small portion of this market, if they decide to produce only a third of the wheat that they're producing now, it's not really going to have an effect. You wouldn't even see the supply curve shift in this example if they decided to do that, because there's such a small part of the market. And that's why they don't have the ability to raise their prices. So their demand curve that they're facing is going to be determined by the interaction of supply and demand in the overall market. And again, it's going to be horizontal at that $7. Now that we've got this market set up, let's explore how a perfectly competitive firm decides to produce and how they're going to maximize profits. We're going to be assuming that these firms are trying to maximize their profits. So profit that we'll be working with is just the total revenue minus the total cost. So all the money a firm takes in from selling their product minus the cost of creating it. Everything left over is profit that they get to keep. So when we're looking at the revenue for a perfectly competitive firm, it's going to be very simple. The math's going to be very easy because the firm receives the same amount of money for each unit. Because they have this horizontal demand curve, in this case $7, for the first unit they sell, they're making $7. So going from 0 to 1 bushel, they get $7. Going from 14,999 units to 15,000 units, again, they're getting $7. So this is going to be really nice to work with today. So in this case, the price, this example, $7 equals the average revenue equals the marginal revenue. So the average revenue is the total revenue divided by the quantity of the product sold. In this case, the total revenue is going to be the price times the quantity of units. So it ends up, the Q's end up canceling, so we just end up with the price. Marginal revenue is the change in the total revenue from selling one more unit of a product. Because they're all being sold for $7, the marginal revenue is just going to be $7. So we have here a table showing this. In column 1, we have the number of bushels, going from 0 up to 10. And keep these numbers small so they're easy to work with. Not be working with like 15,000, something crazy like that. The market price is $7, and again, because this is a perfectly competitive market, the demand curve is horizontal, the price is going to be $7, no matter how many units they sell. So your total revenue, or your number of bushels, your quantity, times the price, for 1 unit would be $7, 7 times 1. For 5 units, it would be 5 times 7, 35. For 10 bushels of wheat, it'll be the quantity 10 times 7 or 70. And we see each time the average revenue is $7 and the marginal revenue is $7. So our horizontal demand curve that we're looking at is also the average revenue curve and the marginal revenue curve, which makes it simple to draw because it's just one line equaling three things. So let's suppose these costs in column 3 here are going to be the costs faced by Farmer Parker. He produces no wheat. He has a total cost of $10. So that's, the fixed cost he's facing. Remember, Jill Johnson had the cost of her pizza shop, the cost of the ovens to go in there. That was fixed no matter how much pizza she sold. There's some equipment, some land, whatever that Farmer Parker has to pay for no matter how much he produces. So the total cost, in this case, where there's 0 units being produced, is your fixed cost. Then from there, you see the total cost increasing as you produce more units. Those are your variable costs, so like your labor cost. If we take the difference between the total revenue and the total cost, we can find the profit in this very simple example. So initially, the total revenue is $0, and 7, 14. Total cost is 10, 14, 16, 50. The total cost of producing this wheat is going to be higher than the revenue the farmer's taking in. So our profit for these first 3 levels of production are going to be negative. The farmer's actually going to be earning a loss. But over time, eventually, the farmer's going to start earning a profit. So starting with the 3rd unit, they make a profit of $2.50, but it peaks all the way up at $13 a profit for units 6 and 7. And then after that, the marginal cost starts increasing more than, or the total cost starts increasing more than the total revenue, and their profit ends up falling again, and eventually turns negative. These are the diminishing marginal production that we saw in the previous chapter. Eventually, you hire more and more workers, they just become less and less productive, so your costs increase more than the money you're making back from the units you're producing. So there's going to be some level of output that is going to lead to the maximum profit. So what a perfectly competitive firm wants to do is figure out what that level is. Now, when firms make decisions, remember, they think on the margin. They're not thinking about the total number of units. So they don't just sit there and say, okay, right now we're making 0 units. What do we think is going to maximize our profit? They're not picking which number of these bushels they should do and just leaving it there. That may be how they start. They may say, all right, let's start with 4 bushels. Let's see what we can do with that. But then looking at the costs they're facing, looking at the revenue they're going to make, they then think at that 4th unit, okay, my profit's $7. If I want to go to producing 5 units, total revenue is going to increase by $7, again, because that's the price. My total cost is only going to increase by $3.50. So I can increase my profit by producing 1 more unit. So then they start thinking, okay, if I produce this next unit, is the revenue I'm going to make go up more than the cost? Or will it go up less than the cost? And they'll find that point where they maximize their profit. Now, instead of thinking of just total cost and total revenue, firm can look at the marginal cost and the marginal revenue. It's an easier way to think about what level to produce at so they can reach the maximum profit. Your marginal revenue, again, it's going to be $7 no matter what in this perfectly competitive market. Makes this so much easier to deal with. I mean, well, at least 7. So then you look at the marginal cost. It starts out high, and then it drops. It starts at $4 and $2.50, $2, and then starts increasing again. So we have that Nike swoosh like we had in the last chapter. A firm can increase their profit as long as the marginal cost or the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost. So the money they're making for the next unit is greater than the cost of producing that next unit. So anytime the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost, a firm wants to produce more. Sorry, I was working on this morning. The example they give in the book was they didn't have marginal revenue ever equal marginal cost exactly, which is a really shitty thing to do on an example when you're trying to teach someone that you produce until marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So I played with all these numbers this morning. So we look at here, marginal revenue is $7. The marginal cost of producing this first unit is only $4. So a firm should increase production. They should make that first unit. Then going from the first unit to the second unit, the marginal revenue is $7, and the marginal cost is only $2.50. So the amount of money they're making in revenue from this next unit is greater than the cost of producing the next unit. So they're going to produce the second unit as well. And so on and so on. So at the sixth unit, the sixth unit right here, marginal revenue is $7, again, it's only $7 in this case. Marginal cost is $4.50. So they're still making more money and taking in more revenue than the cost that they're spending on producing this next unit. Finally, here at the seventh unit, the marginal revenue equals $7 and the marginal cost equals $7. So at that point, the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. So when they produce this last unit, the benefit they're getting is equal to the cost. This is where they're maximizing their profit. Going to the next unit, the eighth unit, they're going to get the marginal revenue. So the revenue from that eighth unit is going to be $7 again. But the marginal cost of producing that unit is going to be $8.50. So a firm producing 7 units is going to look at that. They're going to say, okay, if I produce this 8 bushel of wheat, it's going to cost me more than I'm going to make back from it. So it's going to cut into my profits. So they'll choose not to make that last unit. So they'll stop there making 7 bushels of wheat. So your profit is maximized when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So we're trying to figure out when a perfectly competitive firm is going to maximize their profit, where they want to produce that. It's where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. It's important to remember that. I write that down because people get that wrong on the exam all the time. But it's very important to understand where firms, and we'll see this in monopolistic markets and in monopolistic competition. So it's important to remember that firms are going to choose to produce where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. Here we see this graphically. Now, I wasn't able to make a new one of these charts this morning, so we see a slight difference here at the 7th unit between marginal revenue and marginal cost. Just pretend they cross at that 7th unit. Again, kind of a dick move to tell people you produce our marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and you create an example where they don't quite equal each other. But looking on a graph, that makes it easy. Here's the marginal cost curve that slopes upward. Again, that kind of Nike swoosh kind of thing. And our marginal revenue curve, which is equal to the price, which is equal to the average revenue at $7. So a firm is going to maximize profit where the marginal revenue curve and the marginal cost curve cross each other. In this case, right here at 7 units, which is what we saw looking through the table with all the costs and stuff from the firm. So this is, we'll be working with graphs a lot more, and this, if you're trying to draw a graph to represent a firm in a perfectly competitive market, you'll be drawing this, where you have this horizontal demand curve, marginal revenue curve, and the horizontal, or not the horizontal, the Nike swoosh marginal cost curve. So we basically developed two rules. We just walked through an example, but this is going to hold for all perfectly competitive firms. So the profit maximizing level of output is the difference between the total, where the difference between the total revenue and the total cost is greatest. That came from our first table right here. Where the difference is the greatest, in this case, is either at 6 or 7 units. Firm would probably choose to produce at 7 units to produce as much as possible, but either of those two will maximize the profit. There's a graph in your textbook that shows total revenue and total cost graphically. That's not important. I didn't want to include that because I'm not going to ask you any questions about that, so it's just confusing and one extra thing that could trip you guys up. But as we show graphically, the profit maximizing level of output is also where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's the important one because firms make decisions on the margin. They think of, should we produce this additional unit or not? It's much easier than sitting down and thinking, okay, how many units in total do we produce? Do we produce 10,000? Do we produce 1 million? Or you think, much easier to sit down and think, okay, this is what we're doing right now. Should we do more and make more money, or will it actually make us less money? Now these rules hold for every firm. So we'll use them in the the monopolistically competitive market and in monopolistic markets. Oligopoly is a little funny. We'll analyze that using slightly different tools. Now for perfectly competitive markets, we have a third rule. So because the price equals the marginal revenue, the profit maximizing level of output is where the price equals the marginal cost. Because the price here and the marginal revenue here are the same, you can just switch them. This holds for perfectly competitive markets because we have a horizontal demand curve at that market price. Other markets, it's not going to be the case. So only in perfectly competitive markets does this third rule exist. So now that we've talked about where firms are going to choose to produce, or marginal revenue equals marginal cost, we can explore what happens when a firm is earning either a profit or a loss. What happens to that individual firm, and what's going to happen in the market for that product. So we say that profit equals total revenue minus total cost. Total revenue equals the price times the quantity. So we can plug that in for total revenue and rearrange some stuff. So if we divide everything by the quantity, and you have the profit per unit equals the price minus the average total cost. So the price of the good minus the average total cost of producing it. We rearrange, multiply both sides by Q. We have the profit equals the price minus the average total cost times the quantity. This slide is just so you guys know where it comes from, because this is going to be our profit condition. We can think of this equation for profit like the area of a rectangle. So we can think of price minus average total cost as, as the height of the rectangle, and the quantity as the length of the rectangle. Using this idea of this as like a rectangle, we can show profit on a graph. So I'm not going to have you guys work on an equation like this. This is just evidence of what we're going to be working with. So you know that this comes from somewhere. It's not just something I made up. because we have average total cost on here, we're going to need to include the average total cost curve for our graph for a perfectly competitive firm. So we still have our marginal cost here, like we did before, and it's just kind of like these switch things still. Then we have our demand curve, our marginal revenue curve, right here, horizontal to market price. The firm is going to produce where the marginal revenue curve, the demand curve, the price, is going to cross the marginal cost curve. That's your profit maximizing level of output. That's where the firm is going to make your greatest amount of profit. So that's where they're going to try to produce. Again, firms can be wrong, so it may take some time, some trial and error to reach that point, but eventually that's where they're going to go to. Now, our profit is the difference between the price and the average total cost. So we're going to look at this profit maximizing level of output at Q right here, where the marginal revenue curve crosses the marginal cost curve. We're going to look at the difference between that price and the average total cost curve. Right here is going to be our per unit profit. So the price we're selling minus the average total cost. So if we want to find out the firm's total profit, we just multiply that by the quantity. So we have all these units here times the profit per unit. When the average total cost curve is lower than the price, the firm is going to be earning a profit. If it's above the price, the firm is going to be earning a loss. This should be intuitive. If you're taking in more money than the cost of producing it, you're going to earn a profit. If you're spending more money per unit than the amount of money you're taking in from selling it, you're going to earn a loss. So in this case, it's the green area here is going to be the total profit. So that rectangle is going to be the total profit that a firm's making. Does this make sense to you guys? So a common mistake people make that I want to talk about right now is thinking that profit is maximized at this point, Q1 here, where the marginal cost equals the average total cost. Those two curves cross. This is not the case. This is not where firms want to produce. So if you look at it graphically, it shows basically what we looked at before with the table. So the marginal revenue at this point is going to be greater than the marginal cost. Marginal revenue is right here. Go back to the previous example where the price was $7. Your marginal revenue here is $7. But down here, the marginal cost is, say, $6. So the firm is still earning a profit per unit, producing at this point Q1. So if a firm chooses to produce here, they're leaving profit opportunity on the table. Once they recognize that, they're not going to let it sit there for long. Economists make a joke that there's no $1,000 bills on the sidewalk. Like two economists are walking down the street. One says, "Oh, look at that, $1,000." The other economist says, "Well, no, if there was $1,000 in the ground, someone would have picked it up already because it's worth a lot of money." Same thing with this business, is that there's an opportunity to make a profit. They're going to take advantage of it. You can expect that. Because their marginal cost less than the marginal revenue, they're going to continue to produce. And they're going to increase the quantity out here, the Q, the profit maximizing quantity, where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. So we're going to be producing, when you're drawing it graphically, where your marginal cost curve, that Nike swoosh, crosses the horizontal demand curve, marginal revenue curve. The average total cost curve is going to be included so that you can see what the profit is going to be. Yeah.
What's that yellow box representing again?
That's going to be your total profit. So the difference here between the marginal cost and demand, so that price, and the average total cost is going to be your per unit profit. And then that quantity there, all the way across, multiply that by the per unit profit and you get the total profit. Okay, so when a firm produces at the level or at the quantity where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, that's going to be where they maximize their profit. Now, in some cases, a firm might just not make a profit. No matter how many units they produce, their costs are still going to be greater than the revenue from producing those goods. That's a sign that a firm should not stay in this market in the long run because they're not providing value to consumers. Those resources will be used much better in some other, making some other product that consumers value more. But in the short run, they still need to figure out how to produce. So we've been calling this the profit maximizing level of output, but that's only in the case that a firm makes a profit. When there's no chance for them to make a profit, then it's the loss minimizing level of output. They still want to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, even if they're earning a loss, at least in the short run. Because that's the best they can do. So they're still going to want to use that rule to figure out where to produce, even if they're going to be earning at a loss. So before we looked at a situation where a perfectly competitive firm was earning a profit, the average total cost curve was down here. It was lower than the price or the marginal revenue the firm was receiving for their product. In this case, it's going to be the same. So this is a firm breaking even. Zero profit, zero loss. So you have the marginal cost curve and the marginal revenue curve. That's the quantity that they're going to be producing at. It's going to be maximizing their profit. But in this case, the average total cost is equal to the price, equal to the marginal cost, equal to the marginal revenue. They're all the same. They all cross that same point. So the difference between the price and the average total cost in this case is zero. So 0 times whatever quantity they're producing is still going to be 0. So the firm here is breaking even. They're making no profit, but they're earning no loss. If they chose to produce to the left of the quantity, so a lesser quantity, say right here, the marginal revenue at this point is going to be greater than the marginal cost right here. So they can make themselves better off by producing more. Likewise, if they produced over here, the marginal cost up here is greater than the marginal revenue. So they're losing money by producing more. So they're not going to want to be to the right of that profit maximizing level of output. So even if there's no profit to be made, they can still break even by producing where marginal revenue equals marginal cost.
Wait, why is it not better to produce when the marginal revenue is higher than the marginal cost? Why is it better to produce when they're equal?
Because you're leaving money on the table, so to speak. So if you're producing right here, it's still a good situation to be in. Like you're still making more money than you're spending. But if you produce one more unit, you can still increase your profit more. And as you keep moving and increasing the quantity, till marginal revenue equals marginal cost, you're still increasing your profit. So way back here, your marginal cost here is $2.50, your marginal revenue is $7. You're earning a profit on that unit, but your total profit is at $7. You produce one more unit, the marginal cost is going to increase, but your profit, your total profit is still going up. Your total profit is going to increase until you have your marginal cost equal to your marginal revenue. So you're maximizing your overall profit here, whereas here you're maximizing like your per unit profit. You're welcome. Any other questions about that? Question doesn't mean like you're dumb or like people are gonna laugh at you. It means I didn't explain something well enough. Okay, so some firms, and this firm is in a bad situation. There's no way they can ever make a profit. Their average total cost curve here is always greater than the price. from the demand and marginal revenue curve. They're all the same. So if they want to do as well as they can, in this case, it's going to be minimizing their loss. They can still minimize their loss by following the marginal revenue equals marginal cost rule. They produce here, the marginal revenue equals marginal cost at your loss minimizing level of output now. The loss that they earn is going to be the difference between the average total cost and the price at that point times the number of units. They produce down here at this quantity. The difference there is a lot greater. So even though they're producing fewer units, the loss per unit is going to be higher. Likewise, if they produce out here, the quantity is going to be higher. And at first, the loss may stay about the same, but then the loss per unit is going to increase. So if they didn't produce where the marginal revenue equal the marginal cost, they would end up with greater losses. Now, a firm's not going to want to do this forever, but sometimes it makes sense to do this in the short run. Did anyone take, or are they taking Accounting 102 in this class?
No, it's already taken, right?
Yeah, taking that or took in the past. Okay, so there's, I had it with Logue almost a decade ago, like 8 or 9 years now. And he talked about when firms should decide to produce at a loss or not. This is the same basic idea that he talked about then. You're going to want to consider your fixed cost and your variable cost. We're going to be looking at this graphically instead of just looking at like a balance sheet or income statement or whatever. I think it's easier to use graphs, but as an economist, I know I'm different than most other people. So maybe you guys like looking at a financial statement to figure it out. Well, before we do that, when we determine the quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, whatever that level of output is, we immediately know whether a firm is making a profit, breaking even, or earning a loss, just with these three curves, with your demand curve, marginal revenue curve, price curve, average total cost, and marginal cost. So if the price is greater than the average total cost, the firm is making a profit. A good situation for a firm. The price is equal to the average total cost, your firm is breaking even. And if the price is less than the average total cost, so right here, where your price is lower than any point on the average total cost curve, the firm is making a loss. No matter what level of output the firm is producing at, whether it's 10 units like in our example, or less than 10 units in our example, or whether it's 15,000 units, like the farmer from the beginning of the chapter. These statements are going to hold true. Okay, so now this section is going to be thinking about how to decide whether to produce or to shut down in the short run when a firm is earning a loss. So let's suppose that a firm in a perfectly competitive market is making a loss. They're like this firm right here, where no matter what they do, they're going to be earning a loss. It's not that they could be earning a profit if they chose the proper level of output. No matter what they do, they're going to be earning a loss. Their two options are continue to produce and try to minimize that loss in the short run, or they could stop production by just shutting down. Now, if the firm shuts down, they have to pay their fixed cost. So Jill Johnson in her pizza shop from last chapter still has to pay her rent, still has to pay her insurance, still has to pay, make the payments on her loan as she took out to buy the place, whether she produces 0 or 1 million pizzas. So the firm has to decide whether to shut down, pay those fixed costs, but face no variable costs. So they're not paying their labor or any of those variable costs. They're not buying ingredients, things like that. Or if they should produce, where they're going to end up facing some costs. They're going to have to pay their workers, buy them raw materials, that kind of stuff. But they obtain some revenue. So is that revenue going to be worth it? to cover some of the fixed costs. Now, fixed costs, when a firm is trying to make this decision, they should ignore their fixed cost. The reason is because these are sunk costs. By sunk costs, that means they've already been paid or they have to be paid like legally, no matter what they do. So no matter what their decision is, they're gonna have to pay these fixed costs. So when making their decision, they should only look at the variable costs, the cost of their future actions, not of their past actions. So there's an idea called the sunk cost fallacy, where people think I have to keep doing this because of all the time and effort I put in the past. Anyone play poker in here, or like gambling with cards? Okay, so if you're playing Texas Hold'em, and you've got the 5 cards that everyone gets, and there's a round of betting between each one. You first look at your cards, you bet. They flip over the first 3, you bet. Flip over the 4th, you bet. Flip over the last one, you bet. Let's say you're looking at like a straight or a flush. So you need 5 cards to be able to do that. So you've got, say, like 2 hearts in your hand, flip over the first 3 cards, and there's 2 hearts there. And you're thinking, all right, like, I've got a chance of getting a flush, that's a good hand, I'll bet to stay in. They flip over the next card, it's a spade. You think, well, I still have a shot at getting a flush, it's gonna be a good hand, I'm gonna stay in. So you bet again. Flip over the last card, and it's, say, a club. So you don't have a flush, your hand's shit. A lot of people are tempted to say, well, I put all this money in already. Why don't I just bet a little bit more, call whoever bet and stay in just in case. You never know, maybe that person was trying to bluff me. That's the sunk cost fallacy. You can't consider the previous rounds of betting you've done already. You have to look at your situation where you're at and say, what are my chances of winning? Firms cannot look at their sunk costs or their fixed costs already. They've been paid or they're required to be paid. So in this case, if they're trying to determine whether or not to shut down, they can only look at the cost that they're gonna have to spend to operate. So they look at their variable cost. Another example of sunk costs is when you've been in a relationship and it turns shitty after a couple of years and you think, oh, we put in all this time already, like we might as well stick with it. You look at the future and you say, like, is this good now? Is the future gonna be good or not? If it's bad, then you get out of it. I always hesitate to use that example because I'm the last person that should give relationship advice. So we're only looking at variable costs. We're only looking at the costs that as a firm, that we are going to face if we decide to produce, ignoring all those fixed costs that we've already spent. So the firm should not produce if the total revenue is less than the variable cost. So if your cost of production, in this case, just the variable cost, so not any of the sunk costs, if your variable cost is less than the revenue you're gonna take in, then by producing, you're gonna earn a greater loss. At that point, if you produce nothing, it'll be better than if you produce something. If we divide both sides by 2, we can get price equals the average variable cost, which is very convenient for working with it graphically. So if the price that you're receiving is less than the average variable cost, you should produce no output. You shut down in the short run. You send everyone home from the plant, or you tell the waiters and waitresses not to come in that day. If your price is greater than the average variable cost, then you still follow the marginal revenue equals marginal cost rule. That's going to minimize your loss. So basically, the marginal cost curve tells us the relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. So it's the firm's supply curve. So that Nike swoosh we were working with is going to be the firm's supply curve as well. So the firm is going to produce where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. So because the price equals the marginal revenue for a firm, that's any perfectly competitive market, the firm is going to produce where the price equals the marginal cost. Basically what this is telling us is that the firm is going to make its production decision based on the marginal cost curve. That's basically what we just said at the end of this slide. This is representing it graphically. So your marginal cost curve here, in the short run, is going to be the firm's supply curve as well. That's how they're going to make the decision of how much to produce. There's a marginal cost for what they're facing. So now, let's include the average variable cost. We have this average total cost curve here. If the price is up here, they're going to be earning a profit. When it's down below the average total cost curve, they'll be earning a loss. Let's assume the firm is earning a loss for this example. Here's our average variable cost curve. As long as the marginal cost curve is above that, the firm is going to be willing to supply some units. They'll minimize their loss by doing that. But once they reach the minimum of the average variable cost curve, that is their shutdown point. Below that, the price is less than the average variable cost. They're going to be losing money on every unit they produce. They're going to be increasing their losses. At that point, they're going to decide to shut down. So our supply curve follows the marginal cost curve down here to the average variable cost curve. Then it goes horizontal. Any price below that instantly goes to zero. They don't produce anything. They shut down. I'm not going to have you draw these curves right here. This is just to represent the idea, to show you guys graphically that the second this marginal cost, the price, and the price that you're getting for the good, whatever product, falls below the average variable cost, you stop producing. At that point, you're just making yourself worse off. Okay, so this is kind of like a couple of chapters ago, we showed the individual, I think it was demand curves for private good and the public good, how you like add them together. This is the same basic thing. So we have one wheat farmer here. This is their marginal cost curve, their supply curve. We're going to add all these wheat farmers together, and we'll get the market supply curve. Basically all this slide is saying. So the market supply curve for wheat is going to be the sum of all the wheat farmers. So in this case, we have at the market price of say $7. This individual farmer is going to supply 15,000 bushels of wheat. Let's say they all face the same marginal cost curve, same supply curve, to keep it easy. We're just going to add them all together, so we end up with 2.25 trillion bushels of wheat. And they're still going to choose to produce all of them at that market price of $7. Okay. And the last thing I want to talk about for this chapter is if everyone can do it, you can't make money at it. Basically, in a perfectly competitive market, there are no barriers to entry, or they're extremely low. So if a firm is earning a profit, and a profit is a sign that firms can jump in and begin competing and actually make money, they're providing a product that consumers actually want. In a perfectly competitive market, because there's low barriers to entry, firms are going to do that. And what they're going to do is compete down the price because they're offering more and more units. They're expanding the supply. It lowers the price of the good. So it's going to eliminate the profit. Now, when I've been talking about profit so far in this chapter, I've been talking about economic profit, not accounting profit. In the previous chapter, when we talked about costs, we talked about implicit cost. These were opportunity costs. So it was the money that Jill Johnson could have made working as an accountant instead of running a pizza shop. It was the money she could have earned on her investment, like the interest, instead of putting it into her company. And these are the opportunity costs, or some of the opportunity costs that she faced. Well, the profit we've been working with so far includes the implicit costs and the implicit benefits or the implicit revenue that these firms faced. So the opportunity cost could be producing goods in some other industry where the accounting profit is higher. So looking at an example, Ray Gillette decides to leave ISIS, the spy agency, and give up his salary, his $30,000 salary plus all the money he skims off the top, and open up a cage-free egg farm back in his family land. Anyone here watch Archer? Okay, like one person. So he goes back to his brother's property where he was growing that weed in like season 4. Turns that into a cage-free egg farm. So he invests $100,000 of his own dollars in the farm. Gives up that $10,000 per year in interest that he could have received. So that's an implicit cost. That's his opportunity cost. His $30,000 salary is an opportunity cost, and the interest he could have made on his investment, opportunity cost. So these are included in considering when he considers his costs and benefit of opening up this egg farm. So here we have, just like we had for Jill Johnson before, his costs. So his explicit costs, say a lot of $15,000 worth of water, $25K in wages, $20K in fertilizer, electricity, paying back the loan. But then there's these implicit costs that he's not actually writing a check for. So the foregone salary, the interest investment he had to give up. So the total cost, implicit and explicit, ends up being $125,000. Let's say Ray produces 50,000 dozen eggs, sells them at $3 per dozen. That gives him a revenue of $150,000. So his economic profit, when you consider the opportunity cost of the other ways he could have used his money, he ends up with a profit of $25,000. If instead the implicit costs were higher, let's say his salary was $60,000 instead, he would end up earning an economic loss of negative $5,000. Now, if you're looking at his bank statement or his income statement, or balance sheet, whatever, you're not going to consider these implicit costs. So the costs are $40,000 lower, so they're $85,000. So if you're looking at his financial statements, his profit is $50,000 minus $150,000 minus $85,000. So he's earning a pretty good accounting profit, making more money than he's spending. When you consider his opportunity cost, his profit becomes lower. We won't get to the full implications today, so we'll have to start very beginning next class with that. Unfortunately, Ray's profits aren't going to last in the long run. When firms see the opportunity to profit, they see, even when considering the opportunity cost of being in another industry or using that money for other uses, they're still earning a profit, or he's still earning a profit. They say they can too. So some farmers that sell regular eggs will switch to cage-free eggs. Some people will open up new farms and start selling cage-free eggs. When we see the number of firms in a market increase, remember that's going to shift the supply curve to the right. So that's going to lower the price that the eggs are being sold at and increase the quantity that's being bought and sold on the market. Okay, just a couple minutes. So right here is the market for cage-free eggs. Our market demand curve, which again is downward sloping, and we have the market supply curve, which is upward sloping. And here on the right, you have the equilibrium price of $3 and the equilibrium quantity for the whole market at 15,000. Okay. Please look at the numbers here. This should be greater, so it should be like 50,000. And that should be 15,000. At $3, this is the cost curve that Ray is going to be working with. So The demand curve, marginal revenue curve equals the price. It's horizontal at $3. Our marginal cost curve, which is our Nike swoosh. The quantity he's going to produce is going to be where the marginal revenue crosses the marginal cost curve, brings it down to the quantity. That's the quantity he's going to produce. And his profit is going to be the difference between the marginal cost and the average total cost times the total quantity. So this whole greenish, yellowish, brownish rectangle is going to be his profit. This is great for Ray, but it's not going to last for very long. Because he has this profit, which includes the opportunity cost, so the money he could be making in another industry, he's still earning a profit. The accounting profit is even higher. But even when considering other uses for his money, he's still earning a profit. This is going to attract other firms to begin competing in this industry, begin offering this product. So what we see happen, supply curve shifts to the right as new entrants enter this market. That's going to push the market price down and the supply and demand curve cross here. So the price will fall from, say, $3 to $2. You trace this across to his individual market demand curve, or his supply and demand curve. As the price falls to $2, produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. In this case, that's what the average total cost equals. All three cross at the same point, so he's going to make zero economic profit. Firms are going to enter, and they're going to continue to enter the market as long as there is some economic profit here. And they're going to keep entering, and they're going to keep competing it down until no one is earning an economic profit. Once that economic profit is zero, because of the opportunity costs associated with it, if you would want to enter that market, you would end up earning an economic loss. That next person, once you reach the break-even point. Well, that person could make more money in some other industry. The opportunity costs are now increasing. We're going to end here for today, and we'll pick up with this tomorrow. Just finishing up